I found out who my family really was the night I asked them for $5,000, and every single one of them thought I was joking. The doctor's words were still ringing in my ears when my brother laughed into the phone, a sharp, careless sound, like I'd just told a bad joke at Thanksgiving dinner. "Come on," he said, "you're fine, you're always fine." I stared at the wall of my living room at the framed flag folded tight in its triangle, and realized something had just broken. Not loudly, quietly, the kind of break you don't hear until it's already too late. That was the moment I decided to test them. Not out of spite, not out of anger. Out of clarity. The doctors hadn't said I would die tomorrow. They were careful with their words. Doctors always are. But they did say the phrase that changes everything: running out of time. I'd gone in for what I thought was a routine follow-up. I was 39 years old, a Navy officer with nearly 2 decades of service, and I still believed discipline could outrun biology. I sat upright in that white exam room, hands folded neatly in my lap, while the doctor explained test results in a calm, rehearsed tone. He talked about options, about probabilities, about preparing. "In your line of work," he added gently, "you understand contingency planning." I nodded. Of course I did. I drove home afterward instead of going back to base. I needed quiet. The kind of quiet you only get inside your own house, the one you worked for, paid for, and never talked about much. The house wasn't fancy. A modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood bought years earlier with a VA loan when I was still young enough to believe life followed clean timelines. I'd paid it down steadily, quietly. No drama. No debt hanging over me. It was the only thing I truly owned. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and opened a legal pad. I didn't write a will yet. I just wrote names. My parents. My brother. My sister. I stared at that list for a long time. In the military, we're taught to prepare for the worst without expecting it. Write things down. Make plans. Not because you're pessimistic, but because you're responsible. Still, something inside me hesitated. I didn't want to leave behind confusion, or resentment, or regrets. I wanted to know before I made anything official who would actually show up. So I decided to ask for help. Not a handout, not an inheritance discussion, just help. $5,000. I called my parents first. They answered on the second ring, their voices instantly alert when they heard mine. They always sounded proud when they spoke about my career. They liked telling people their daughter was high-ranking Navy. It made good dinner conversation. I didn't mention the diagnosis right away. I told them I might be facing some medical expenses, that things were uncertain. "I need $5,000, I said calmly. There was a pause. Papers rustled on their end. My mother sighed. "Well, my father said slowly we'd have to look at our retirement accounts." My mother jumped in. "You know how fixed incomes are." They suggested budgeting tips, insurance questions, maybe a loan, maybe later. They never asked how sick I was. They never asked if I was scared. I thanked them and hung up. Next was my brother. He picked up while driving. I could hear music in the background, loud and careless. When I told him I needed $5,000, he laughed. "Is this some kind of test?" he said. "Because you always land on your feet." I waited for him to say more. He didn't. After we hung up, I sat very still and felt something settle in my chest. Heavy. Permanent. Then my phone rang again. It was my sister. She didn't interrupt me. She never did. She listened all the way through quietly, like she always had when we were kids and our parents were too busy or too tired. "I don't have that kind of money," she said finally. I told her I understood. "I have $1,500, she continued. "It's not much, but I can drive up tonight. It's about 4 hours. I can be there." I closed my eyes. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what I needed it for. She didn't ask if I was exaggerating. She just showed up. She arrived the next morning in her old sedan bags, under her eyes, hair pulled back in a tired knot. She brought groceries. She didn't mention the money again. She cleaned my kitchen without asking, made soup, sat with me through long stretches of silence like it was nothing at all. That night she slept on my couch. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing from the other room. That was when I knew. She had no idea what I was about to do. The next morning, after my sister left for a few hours to run errands, I sat alone at my kitchen table and stared at my phone. It felt strange what I was about to do. Calculated, almost cold. But the truth was, I wasn't trying to trap anyone. I wasn't setting a clever snare or plotting revenge. I was looking for clarity, the kind that doesn't come from words or promises, but from what people do when there's nothing in it for them. In the Navy, we learn quickly that intentions don't matter much. Actions do. When things go wrong, nobody cares what you meant to do. They care about who showed up. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through my call history. The conversations from the night before replayed in my mind. My parents' careful excuses, my brother's laughter, my sister's quiet certainty. I realized something unsettling. None of them had asked me how bad it really was. That was when I knew I needed to be very clear enough that no one could later say they misunderstood. So I decided to call them again, not to ask for more, just to see what changed when the truth got closer. I started with my parents. My mother answered first. She sounded cheerful, as if last night's conversation had already been filed away, as something inconvenient but resolved. "I've been thinking," I said. "The doctors aren't sure how much time I have." That got her attention. There was a sharp inhale. My father's voice joined the line a moment later. He asked what the doctors had said, exactly what the prognosis was, whether I'd considered second opinions. I told them the truth without drama, that nothing was certain, that things could go either way, that I was putting my affairs in order just in case. My father cleared his throat. "You've always been strong," he said. "You've handled worse than this." My mother added, "And you're single. You don't have dependents. That helps." I waited. There it was, the space where concern should have lived. I told them again that I might need help, not later, not hypothetically, soon. My mother said she would pray on it. My father said we'd talk again after the weekend. Neither of them offered the money. When the call ended, I didn't feel angry. I felt something quieter, like a door closing gently but firmly. I called my brother next. This time he didn't laugh right away. "So this is serious?" he asked, his tone suddenly cautious. "Yes," I said. There was a pause. I imagined him weighing his options, calculating what this meant for him. "Well," he said finally, "you've always been the responsible one. I figured you'd have everything covered." I asked him directly if he could help. He sighed. "I've got a lot going on right now." He mentioned expenses, a trip he had planned, things he didn't want to cancel. "You understand," he said. I did. I hung up and set my phone face down on the table. For a long time I just sat there. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the block. Ordinary life going on, completely unaware that mine had shifted. That afternoon my sister came back with groceries and a stack of old photo albums she'd found in my closet. "I thought we could go through these," she said, smiling softly. We sat on the floor and flipped through pictures from decades ago. Holidays, birthdays, the three of us as kids lined up in front of the same house we'd grown up in. I watched her carefully. She didn't ask about my parents. She didn't ask about my brother. She didn't ask if I'd changed my mind about anything. She just stayed. That evening after dinner, I finally told her everything, about the calls, about the responses, about how alone I'd felt after hanging up the phone. She listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm sorry," she said when I finished. "I wish I could do more." "You already are," I told her. She shook her head. "I just wish they'd been there for you." So did I. Later that night, after she went to bed, I took out the legal pad again. This time I didn't just write names. I wrote notes beside them. Who called back? Who didn't? Who showed up? Who stayed away? I thought about fairness, about what people expect when someone talks about a will. In my family, fairness had always meant splitting things evenly regardless of effort or behavior. But as I sat there in the dim kitchen light, I realized something I'd learned long ago in uniform and somehow forgotten at home. Fair doesn't mean equal. Fair means earned. The next day I called a JAG officer I trusted, someone I'd worked with years earlier. I told him I needed to start preparing documents, nothing dramatic, just responsible planning. He didn't ask why, he didn't pry, he simply scheduled a time to meet. When I hung up, I felt an unexpected sense of calm, not relief, just clarity. The test was already over. I didn't tell my sister what I was planning. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted the decision to stand on its own, untouched by gratitude or guilt. That night as I lay in bed, I listened again to the familiar sounds of the house, the creak of the floorboards, the steady ticking of the clock in the hallway. I thought about how easily people talk about love, about family, about being there for one another. And I thought about how rare it is to see it proven. The doctors had said I was running out of time. But what they hadn't said, what they couldn't have known, was that time had just given me something invaluable. The truth. My sister never announced what she was doing, she just did it. The morning after my call with the JAG officer, I woke up to the sound of dishes clinking softly in the kitchen. For a split second I forgot she was there. Then the smell of coffee drifted down the hallway and I remembered. She was standing at the counter in an old sweatshirt, hair pulled back, moving carefully so she wouldn't wake me. When she noticed me, she smiled like she'd been there all along, which in a way she always had been. "Morning," she said. "I hope you like oatmeal. It was that or eggs and I didn't want to risk burning anything." I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprised me with how rusty it sounded. Over breakfast, she talked about nothing important. Traffic on the drive up, a neighbor's dog that wouldn't stop barking, the grocery store being out of her favorite bread. She never mentioned my parents, never mentioned my brother. And still I felt like she understood exactly what had happened. After we ate, she cleared the table and started wiping down the counters. I told her she didn't have to do that. She waved me off. "You always say that," she said, "and you always let me do it anyway." She was right. For the next few days, she settled into the house like it was second nature. She made soup from scratch, did laundry without being asked, sat beside me during long stretches of quiet when my energy dipped and conversation felt like too much effort. She didn't hover. She didn't ask for updates every hour. She seemed to know when to talk and when to stay quiet, like she was reading a rhythm I didn't even realize I was putting out. One afternoon, she drove me to a follow-up appointment. I insisted I could go alone. She didn't argue. She just picked up her keys and stood by the door. The waiting room was crowded and loud, people flipping through magazines they weren't reading, phones ringing, someone coughing too loudly. I felt exposed there, stripped of my uniform, my rank, my sense of control. My sister sat beside me, hands folded in her lap. When the nurse called my name, she looked up and met my eyes. "I'll be right here," she said. After the appointment, she didn't ask what the doctor had said. She waited until I brought it up myself hours later over dinner. That night, she slept on the couch again. I offered her my bed. She refused. "I'm fine," she said. "This couch has seen worse." In the dark, I thought about how different this felt from the calls with my parents and brother. They had asked questions, offered opinions, given advice. My sister had offered presence. There's a difference you don't fully understand until you need it. On the fourth day, she handed me an envelope. "I brought this," she said almost apologetically. "I know it's not much." Inside was a cashier's check for $1,500. "You don't have to," I started. "I know," she said gently, "but I want to." I held the envelope longer than necessary. That money represented something different for her than it did for anyone else in my family. It wasn't spare, it wasn't extra. It was a sacrifice. I felt a tightness in my throat I hadn't felt since the doctor's office. Later that evening, while she showered, I walked through the house alone. I paused in the doorway of the guest room, the study, the small backyard where I'd planted a tree years ago, and watched it grow taller than the fence. This house had been my anchor, my place to land between deployments, the one thing that stayed steady while everything else shifted. And suddenly I saw it differently. I saw my sister standing at the sink, humming quietly as she washed dishes, sitting on the couch late at night with a blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, driving 4 hours without hesitation because I'd asked for help. She had no idea what this place meant to me. She had no idea what it was worth. The next morning my parents called. They'd talked, they said. They were concerned now, very concerned. My mother asked if I needed help with meals. My father suggested we look into long-term planning. They asked if my sister was still there. "Yes," I said. "Well," my mother replied carefully, "it's good you have someone." It wasn't gratitude I heard in her voice. It was relief, the kind that comes when responsibility shifts quietly onto someone else. After I hung up, I went outside and sat on the back steps. My sister joined me a few minutes later carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Everything okay?" she asked. Yes, I said. And for the first time since this had all begun, I meant it. That afternoon, I made a decision I didn't tell her about. I opened my laptop and reviewed the notes I'd made with the JAG officer. I read through the language slowly, carefully, like I'd been trained to do. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. That evening, as we sat watching an old movie neither of us was really paying attention to, my sister leaned her head back against the couch and sighed. "I'm glad I came," she said. "I almost didn't. I was worried I'd be in the way." I looked at her, then really looked at her. The lines around her eyes, the tiredness she tried to hide, the steadiness underneath it all. "You were never in the way," I said. She smiled small and uncertain and turned back to the screen. She had no idea the house was already hers. The house didn't look like much from the street. Beige siding, a narrow porch, a maple tree out front that dropped leaves everywhere every fall. Most people would have driven past without a second glance. To me, it was a timeline. I bought it my 3rd year in the service, back when I still counted deployments in months instead of memories. The VA loan paperwork had been thick and boring, the kind of thing you sign late at night at a kitchen table you don't own yet. I remember the realtor congratulating me like I'd won something. I didn't feel like I had. I felt like I'd anchored myself to a responsibility. That house was where I came back to after long stretches away, where my uniform hung untouched in the closet while I tried to remember how to live like a civilian again, where I slept in my own bed and listened to the quiet until it felt normal. I paid it down steadily, extra payments when I could, no refinancing games, no bragging. The mortgage shrank quietly the way good things often do. I never talked about its value, not with my parents, not with my brother, not even with my sister. Especially not with my sister. She would have waved it off, said it didn't matter, said she was fine where she was. She always said that, even when she clearly wasn't. The night after my parents' second call, I sat at the dining table again, legal pad open, lamp casting a small circle of light. I added another column to my notes. Effort. Under my parents' names I wrote advice, distance. Under my brother's dismissal. Under my sister's presence. I closed the pad and leaned back in my chair. This wasn't about punishment. That was important to me. I wasn't trying to teach anyone a lesson or get even for old slights. I was deciding where something I loved would land. The next day I met with the JAG officer in a quiet office that smelled faintly of old coffee and paper. He was professional, efficient, and kind in the way military kindness often is, direct without pity. "We can keep this simple," he said. "You can always revise later." I told him that was the plan. We talked through contingencies, medical directives, powers of attorney. Then we came to the house. "Who do you want it to go to?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. "My sister." He nodded, typed a note, and moved on without comment. No raised eyebrows, no questions. In his world, decisions were respected when they were made deliberately. That mattered to me. When I got home, my sister was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of mail she'd sorted for me. She held up a utility bill. "You're paid ahead," she said. "Did you mean to do that?" "Yes," I replied. "I like staying ahead." She smiled. "That's very you." In the afternoon, my brother texted, "Mom says you're making a will." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm preparing, like I always do." He replied almost immediately, "You don't have to do anything drastic." There it was, the assumption. That preparation equaled panic, that decisions made quietly couldn't possibly be rational. I didn't respond. Later that evening, my parents called again. This time their tone was different, measured, careful. They said they'd been talking. They said they were worried. They said they hoped I wasn't making choices based on temporary emotions. I told them I wasn't. My mother paused. "We just want what's fair." I thought about that word, fair. Fair had meant different things in our family over the years. Fair had meant my brother getting second chances. Fair had meant my sister being told to wait. Fair had meant me being expected to manage on my own because I always had. "I do too," I said. They asked if I'd talked to my sister about any of this. "No," I said, "and I don't plan to." "Why not?" my father asked. "Because I want her help to be help," I replied, "not an investment." There was silence on the line. After we hung up, my sister knocked softly on the study door. She held 2 mugs of tea. "You've been on the phone a lot," she said. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said again. The word felt steadier now. She handed me a mug and glanced around the room. "You've always taken good care of this place." I nodded. "I know it sounds silly," she added, "but houses remember things. Who lived in them? Who was kind in them?" I swallowed. That night, I dreamed about the day I moved in, about standing in the empty living room, keys cold in my hand, wondering who would ever sit on the couch with me. I woke up knowing something important had shifted. The next morning, I signed the preliminary documents. Not the final version, not yet, but enough to make my intent real. I folded the papers carefully and placed them in a folder. I didn't feel relief. I felt alignment, like something finally matched the truth I'd been carrying quietly for years. At dinner that night, my sister told me a story from her childhood that I'd forgotten, about waiting for me after school because our parents were late, about how she always felt better when I showed up even if I didn't say much. "You were steady," she said. "You always were." I looked at her across the table and realized how rarely anyone had described me that way. Steady. She had no idea that steadiness was about to change her life. The truth has a way of surfacing in families even when you're careful. It didn't come out because I announced it. I didn't sit everyone down with a dramatic speech. I didn't wave papers in the air. I didn't want a scene. I wanted peace. But my mother had always been good at sensing when something was happening without her permission. It started with a voicemail. I was in the shower when my phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. When I came out, towel around my shoulders, I saw my mother's name on the screen, 3 missed calls, and then a message. Her voice was tight, too controlled. "Call me back now, we need to talk." My sister was in the kitchen stirring soup when I walked out. She glanced up at my face and immediately softened. "Bad call?" she asked. "Not yet," I said, and pressed play again just to hear it one more time. Something in my mother's tone reminded me of childhood, those moments when she decided I'd done something wrong, and the only question was how much trouble I was in. I waited until after lunch to call her back, not to punish her, to steady myself. She picked up on the first ring. "Is it true?" she demanded. No greeting, no small talk. Are you leaving your house to your sister?" My grip tightened around the phone. I didn't ask how she knew. I already had a guess. My father and I had spoken about fairness. My brother had texted. My mother had connected the dots like she always did. "It's my house," I said evenly. "Yes, that's my plan." There was a sharp sound on the line like she'd put her hand over the receiver to speak to someone in the room. Then my father's voice came on. "We just want to understand," he said. His tone was calmer, but it carried the same weight. "Explain yourself." I sat down at the kitchen table. My sister's back was turned, her shoulders tense, even though she wasn't part of the conversation. "It isn't complicated," I said. "I asked for help. You said no. She came." My mother's voice rose. "That's not fair. We didn't say no. We said we had to think." I let the silence stretch. My father cleared his throat. "We're your parents. We've done a lot for you." "You raised me," I said, "and I'm grateful. But what I asked for was not impossible. It was $5,000. And I didn't even need it for the money. I needed to know who would show up." That was when my brother's voice cut in. "He must have been there with them. Of course he was." "You tested us," he scoffed. "Are you kidding? He stopped himself, then laughed like he had the first night. "That's so dramatic." I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. "It wasn't dramatic," I said. "It was simple. I asked. You laughed." "I didn't think you were serious," he snapped. "You're always fine. You're always the hero. You're always the one who's got it all together." There was something almost resentful in his voice, and for the first time I heard it clearly. My strength had never inspired him. It had irritated him, like my responsibility made him feel smaller. My mother stepped back in. "Your sister needs help," she said, as if that should end the discussion. "But this is your family home now. You can't just hand it over because you're upset." Family home. I looked around my kitchen, at the clean counters my sister had wiped down, at the quiet stability I'd built alone. "It's not the family home," I said, my voice low. "It's my home. I bought it. I paid for it. I maintained it. I came back to it after deployments when I was exhausted, when I was scared, when I didn't know if I'd ever feel normal again." My father's voice softened slightly. "We didn't know you felt like that." "You didn't ask," I said. The line went quiet. In the kitchen, my sister turned around slowly, soup ladle frozen in her hand. She was listening now. Her eyes were wide. I hadn't planned for her to hear this part, but maybe it was time. The truth always surfaces. "I don't want to fight," I said into the phone. "But I'm not changing my decision because it makes you uncomfortable." My mother exhaled sharply. "So you're punishing us?" "No," I said. "I'm making a choice." My brother muttered something under his breath, something crude, something bitter. My father told him to stop. My mother asked if my sister was manipulating me. That was when I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. "No," I said louder than I meant to. My sister flinched. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't know. She just came. I turned and looked at my sister then. Her face had gone pale. She set the ladle down with trembling hands. "I didn't," she started. "I know," I told her softly. "You didn't." On the phone, my father said my name, careful warning like he used to when I was a teenager, and he thought I was about to embarrass the family. "Let's meet," he said. "In person. We'll talk this out." Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to hang up and lock the door and never deal with any of them again. But I wasn't trying to sever ties, not completely. "I'll meet," I said, "but I'm not negotiating my will. I'll explain it, that's all." My mother's voice cracked just slightly. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," I said. After I hung up, my sister sank into a chair like her legs had given out. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause—" "You didn't cause anything," I said. I sat across from her and took her hands. This was already there. I just finally looked at it. Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want your house," she said. "I want you." That hit me harder than anything my parents or brother had said. For a long time, we just sat there, hands clasped, the soup simmering forgotten on the stove. Outside, the neighborhood carried on like nothing had happened. Mail trucks, kids riding bikes, somebody's radio playing faintly down the street. Ordinary life. Inside my house, the truth had finally been spoken out loud. And I knew the next meeting face-to-face would change everything. We met a week later at a diner halfway between my house and my parents'. Neutral ground, my father's idea. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed in decades, vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee that tasted the same no matter who poured it. I'd eaten in places like that all over the country, places where people talked about ordinary things, because it felt safer than talking about what really mattered. My sister offered to stay home. "I don't want to make this worse," she said. "You're not the problem," I told her, "and you're not a secret." She came anyway. My parents were already seated when we arrived. My brother sat beside them, arms crossed, jaw set, like he'd rehearsed his anger in the mirror. My mother's smile was tight. My father stood when he saw me pulling out a chair. "You look tired," my mother said. "So do you," I replied and meant it. We ordered before anyone could say anything else. Coffee all around. Pancakes for my sister, eggs for my father. My brother didn't look at the menu. For a few minutes no one spoke. Then my father folded his hands on the table. "We don't want this family torn apart," he said. I nodded. "Neither do I." My mother leaned forward. "Then why are you doing this?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I asked for help," I said. "I didn't ask for advice. I didn't ask for opinions. I asked for help, and I learned who was willing to give it." My brother scoffed. "So now you're the judge." "No," I said. "I'm the owner." That landed harder than I expected. My father looked down at his coffee. "We were scared," he said quietly. "We didn't know how bad it was. We thought you'd handle it like you always do." "That's the problem," I replied. "You always assume I will." My mother's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "We raised you to be strong." "You raised me to be self-sufficient," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." Across the table, my sister sat very still, hands folded in her lap like she might disappear if she moved. My brother finally spoke again. "You could have just asked again." "I shouldn't have to," I said. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Something in his expression shifted, not guilt exactly, but recognition. The kind that comes when someone realizes a pattern they can't unsee. My father cleared his throat. "If we help now, would that change anything?" The question hung there. I shook my head. "No." My mother pressed her lips together. "So that's it." That's not what I said, I replied. This isn't about shutting you out, it's about being honest. I turned to my sister then. She didn't know I said to all of them. She didn't ask. She didn't expect anything. That matters. My sister finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to take something that hurts everyone. I reached for her hand. You're not taking anything, I'm giving it. There was a long silence after that. Not angry this time, just heavy. The waitress came by to refill coffee, unaware she was interrupting something fragile. When she left, my father sighed. We made mistakes, he said. It sounded like it cost him something to admit it. We assumed love didn't need proof. My mother nodded slowly. We were wrong. It wasn't an apology, but it was close. My brother looked down at the table. I should have come, he said. The words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. I didn't think you needed anyone. I didn't respond right away. I watched him sit with that thought. After breakfast, we stood outside in the parking lot, unsure how to end things. No hugs, no dramatic reconciliation, just a quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted. On the drive home, my sister stared out the window. I didn't want this to break anything, she said. It didn't, I replied. It exposed it. That afternoon, my parents called again, not to argue, not to negotiate, just to ask how I was feeling. My brother texted a simple message, I'm here if you need me. I didn't know what the future would bring. My health was still uncertain. Nothing had magically resolved. But the anger had burned itself out, leaving something clearer behind. That night I finalized the will. I signed it calmly, deliberately, like every other serious decision I'd made in my life. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt settled. My sister sat across from me at the table, reading a book, completely unaware that her name was now written into the future. When I finished, I closed the folder and slid it into the drawer. Outside, the maple tree rustled softly in the wind. Inside, for the first time in a long while, the house felt exactly right. I didn't die. Not then. That's the part people always want to know first. The treatment slowed things down. The numbers stabilized enough to buy me time, months at first, then more. The doctors never promised me anything, and I didn't ask them to. I had already learned that certainty is a luxury, not a guarantee. What surprised me wasn't that my body held on. It was how much lighter I felt once the truth was out in the open. The will was signed. The house was accounted for. The decisions were made without anger, without theatrics, without regrets. Once that was done, something inside me loosened its grip. I had spent my life believing responsibility meant carrying everything quietly, paying early, planning ahead, never asking for help unless it was unavoidable. That approach had served me well in uniform. It had not served me as well in my family. My sister stayed another week before returning home. When she left, she hugged me longer than usual, like she was afraid of letting go. You don't owe me anything, she said for the 10th time. I know, I replied. That's why this works. She laughed softly, but her eyes filled anyway. After she left, the house felt different, but not empty. It felt honest, like it had finally become what it was always meant to be. Not a prize, not leverage, just shelter, safety, continuity. My parents came by a few weeks later. No speeches, no accusations. My mother brought a casserole like she used to when we were kids. My father fixed a loose step on the porch without being asked. We talked about ordinary things, weather, neighbors, old memories that had lost their sharp edges. Before they left, my mother took my hand. We didn't know how to show up, she said quietly. We thought loving you meant letting you handle things. I nodded. I know. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was real. My brother took longer. He didn't suddenly transform into someone else. He still joked too much, still avoided difficult conversations. But he checked in. He showed up once unexpectedly with groceries and an awkward smile. I'm trying, he said. That mattered more than an apology. As for my sister, she didn't change at all. She kept working, kept budgeting, kept living carefully. The only difference was the way she walked through my house now, like it wasn't temporary anymore. Like she belonged there even before she officially did. One evening, she stood by the front window and watched the sun dip behind the maple tree. This place feels safe, she said. I smiled. That was the highest compliment I could imagine. When I think back on everything now, what stays with me isn't the anger or the disappointment, it's the clarity. I learned that love doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue its case. It doesn't explain why it couldn't be there. Love shows up. It drives 4 hours with no questions. It sleeps on the couch. It washes dishes without asking. It stays when there's nothing to gain. I also learned something else, something I wish I'd understood sooner. Planning isn't pessimism. Writing a will isn't giving up. Asking for help isn't weakness. They're all forms of respect, for yourself, for the people who matter, for the life you've built. Too many families wait until it's too late, until illness or loss or resentment makes honesty impossible. They assume fairness means splitting things evenly, regardless of effort or presence. They confuse obligation with love. I don't believe that anymore. Fair doesn't mean equal. Fair means intentional. If you're listening to this and you're healthy, I hope you stay that way for a long time. But don't wait for a scare to take stock of your life. Talk to your family, ask the hard questions. Pay attention to who shows up when things get quiet and uncomfortable. And if you're the one who always shows up, the quiet one, the overlooked one, know this: your presence matters more than you realize. It always has. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to reflect on your own life for a moment. Think about who you would trust with what matters most. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, shared, and remembered, consider passing it along or subscribing for more grounded real-life stories that speak to the heart. Thank you for listening.